From the most trusted names in local news, KDPG Sunday Edition.
Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday Edition. I'm Ken Rice. It's being called the medical pandemic of our time, Alzheimer's disease, the sixth leading cause of death in this country. It kills more people than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. And the rate of Americans dying of dementia, including Alzheimer's, has more than doubled just since 2000. This morning, what do we know about the cause of Alzheimer's, how it might be treated? A little later, we'll meet the Alzheimer's Association's Alyssa Marsico and Debbie Cunningham, an Alzheimer's caregiver. But right now, we welcome Dr. Jennifer Lingler, professor at the University of Pittsburgh. She's also director of education at their Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And Niki Kapsambelis is author of the acclaimed book, The Inheritance, a family on the front lines of the battle against Alzheimer's disease. Sally Stapleton, managing editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joins us for the discussion. Sally, always nice to have you here. Welcome to both of you. Just let me ask you to begin by sort of setting the stage. Where are we in terms of the prevalence of Alzheimer's and our demographics as the baby boomer generation ages? What's happening with Alzheimer's numbers? Dr. Lingler.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Sally. It's great to be here this morning. So currently in the United States, anywhere from 5 to 6 million Americans are suffering from Alzheimer's disease or related disorders. To bring those figures home a little bit, in the state of Pennsylvania, we have 280,000 individuals diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and an estimated 400,000 with Alzheimer's disease or related disorder. So highly prevalent would be the bottom line. And
do you have numbers of how many cases, how many new cases there are in Pennsylvania or nationwide, say this year versus last year versus 5 years ago? What's the trend that you're seeing?
Well, we're seeing, because of the population living longer, we're seeing that there are more individuals at any given point in time who have the disease, so the prevalence is higher. There is some promising news in research to suggest that the incidence may be yielding slightly, and that's been largely attributed to individuals having higher levels of education earlier in life and to overall improvements in public health and quality of life. Those statistics are relatively new and still the subject of some debate, but generally in terms of prevalence, the sheer number of individuals experiencing time remains on the rise.
Let me ask you about one of the factors you just mentioned. Higher levels of education earlier in life could reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's later in life?
Potentially. So it's long been is one of the protective factors for the brain, and it's only been recently that large-scale epidemiologic studies have begun to show that as cohorts, generations of individuals who've been subjected to more education and presumably higher quality education may be experiencing lower incidence of Alzheimer's disease over time.
Go ahead, Sally.
And is that a component of people using their brains, thinking through? They talk about learning a new language, doing different things to expand your brain. And do you believe that it's helpful to stave onset?
So to stick on this topic of education, I think there are direct and indirect effects. So as individuals undergo more and more education, they develop some reserve in the brain, so they have more connections between brain cells, and that's the protective element thought to make the brain better able to withstand as pathology, changes related to Alzheimer's disease might develop. So someone might be having the accumulation of pathology, but might not show the symptoms until a later point in time because they've got all these extra connections between brain cells. They've sort of built up this cognitive reserve, as is known in the literature. The indirect effect of education would be that individuals that are more highly educated are more likely to enjoy higher quality lifestyles, so to have all around better health habits, to have better economic opportunities, for example, and all of these things that promote health in general. Back to your point about cognitive stimulation, there's certainly evidence that keeping your brain active in whatever way is pleasurable to you may be beneficial, but there's just no single magic bullet in that sense.
Niki, tell us about your how you came to write a book about a family from North Dakota with an unusual genetic component in their family line.
Well, it actually started in 2009. I was assigned to write an article for the University of Pittsburgh. I'm a journalist by trade. And they said, we have this extended family from North Dakota who have been coming into our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center for research, and we'd like a little article about them. So I sat down with them for about 2 hours and met them, and I was completely blown away. It was one of the probably top 5 moments in my professional life in terms of the impact that they had on me personally. And I just felt like they had a much bigger story to tell.
Obviously, it made an impact on you because you left your reporting career and focused 100% on this family and Alzheimer's to write this book, which has been widely celebrated, widely lauded. This family, specifically the DeMeos, excuse me, the DeMeos from North Dakota, family that had 6 children. The father and 5 of the children all have a trait that says what? What's the significance of that genetic trait they all have in common?
They have a mutation, and if you have this mutation, you are guaranteed to develop early onset Alzheimer's. So by early onset, we're talking about developing the disease in your 40s and you're dying in your 50s. And they can diagnose this mutation in utero. So you can find out before the baby's even born that they're going to have this mutation. Of course, in this case, the science wasn't there yet, so they didn't find out until they were already adults with children of their own who then had a risk of developing the disease.
So what's been the story of this family? The father has died, correct?
The father died before I met the family, and the oldest of those 6 siblings was in a nursing home when I met them. He has since passed away. Of the 5 siblings who had the disease, 3 of them have died. There are 2 who are remaining who have the mutation and 1 who doesn't. And of the 2 that have the mutation, both are still working. They're in a clinical drug trial, and several of their children are in the same trial. And they are pilot testing the efficacy of a drug that is thought to be, or they're testing to see whether it could prevent Alzheimer's if you give it to somebody early enough.
And the University of Pittsburgh is part of that research, is that correct?
Yeah.
And they come to Pittsburgh, do they not?
Yes.
The 2 DeMeau family members. In your experience getting to know this family and learning all about Alzheimer's, did it leave you depressed? Did it leave you, is there any optimism? What was the overall feeling that you came away with?
Well, it's obviously a very sad story. Alzheimer's is a tragic disease, but it left me with an overall feeling of hope because what these people did with this news, they found out in 2004, hey, you've got this disease that we know nothing about, and we don't have a cure for it. And there's a 50% chance that each one of your children is going to have it. And they took something that catastrophic and said, well, we're going to figure out a way to fight the disease. Now, this is a disease that we've known about since 1906, but it's probably been around for as long as humans have been around. And they didn't have any answer for it, and these people just made a collective decision as an extended family that they were going to fight it. Because of them and because of people like them, and there are only a few hundred people in the world known to have this particular mutation.
Wow.
Because people were willing to take that attitude, that then brings a lot of hope to all the rest of the population. And that brought me a lot of hope because it tells me that, you know, there's greatness in an ordinary person that can have that kind of ripple effect. And so, I mean, it did bring me a lot of sadness because not all of the people that I started with when I started writing the book survived to see the book published. But because of what they contributed, possibly I won't get Alzheimer's, my children won't, possibly their children won't, and that's why they did it. And to me, that was incredibly inspiring.
Doctor, I'm really interested in your work vis-a-vis all of this. Tell us the trends, tell us if you're feeling hopeful.
I am feeling hopeful for many of the reasons that Niki suggested. It's an exciting time to be in the field of Alzheimer's research. Not only are there cutting-edge clinical trials underway, which represent the kind of drug that's being tested in the study that Niki just described, represent revolutionary change in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. The currently available treatments have a modest impact on symptoms that an individual is experiencing, And in some cases, they can see some improvement, especially early on when they start those approved medications, but they don't affect the underlying disease pathology. So in Alzheimer's disease pathology, we often think about plaques and tangles in the brain. And the plaques are an accumulation of a protein called beta amyloid. Right now, the drugs that are currently approved don't do anything to affect those levels of plaques and tangles that might be accumulating over time. But the drugs that are currently in trials may dissolve such plaques, prevent their accumulation in the first place. So that represents a dramatic change in how we think about Alzheimer's disease and its treatment, because we would be talking about initiating treatment before symptoms even begin. And to Niki's word, preventing the at least symptomatic manifestation of the disease.
And is it only recently that testing can be done on a living patient that confirms this patient has Alzheimer's, where it used to be only post-mortem?
Yeah, so the diagnosis of the dementia syndrome would still require a clinical evaluation, a solid history about what the changes are that have been observed, physical exam, brain imaging, all of those things. But when you said definitive, so there's no one single test for Alzheimer's. There's nothing called the Alzheimer's test, but advances in brain imaging technology, particularly the visualization of those amyloid plaques, which for a long time historically could only be viewed upon examination of brain tissue at the time of autopsy. So that's why there was this mantra. You can't definitively say it's Alzheimer's until someone passes away. But now we have PET scans that can detect amyloid plaque in the brain of a living person. Again, revolutionary in terms of diagnostic capabilities. And that technology was developed here in Pittsburgh by doctors William Klunk and Chet Mathis.
And just quickly, as someone who has studied Alzheimer's as closely as you have, what the significance to you that it can now be firmly diagnosed with brain scans? And what does that say about the hope that there will eventually be treatments that can reverse, if not cure, the disease?
Well, it's pretty simple to me. Okay, if you can look at how Alzheimer's is unfolding in a living brain, and you can start in somebody that you know, because genetically this family, we can tell before they have symptoms whether it's going to happen, okay? And you can watch Alzheimer's unfold in real time. It makes it then much more possible to develop a drug that targets the disease's underlying biology. Whereas if you were looking after the fact at a cadaver, it's too late, and you're only guessing. So that's a huge breakthrough. That was a game changer in the disease.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we continue, the impact of Alzheimer's on patients and caregivers, and how one courageous family is helping researchers unlock the secrets of the disease. In a moment.